start with, I know we've been talking about it, we'll start with Farscape, which I'm a big fan of. How did you transport yourself into a strange world, both on the set and in real life? Because you were one of only, you were saying, 3 Americans down there.
Yeah, well, I was the only American on the floor. I thought you were going to ask, how did I transport myself to Australia, which well, I got on Air New Zealand, which I did. I flew Air New Zealand all the time, back when they had the direct flight from Sydney to LA. You know, you put the clothes on and you walk in, and then when we walked onto the set in Farscape, we never knew what we were going to see. It was the Henson Creature Shop produced these insanely beautiful and artistic things. So you'd walk in and go, oh wow, that guy's 15 feet tall, you know. So it was pretty easy from that standpoint. And you know, being that I was technically an alien in Sydney while we were shooting, and one of the very few Americans to work on the show out of the thousands of people that worked on it, it wasn't all that difficult for me.
And it broke ground a lot of places, didn't it? I mean, it was the first sort of fantasy thing to put real puppets in, and it was set in Australia, and it told a different sort of life about space. I mean, you had the humdrumbery of, you know, the crew getting on and the endless hours in space and that sort of thing that you didn't see in the sort of wham-bam science fiction shows.
Farscape was a little unusual, particularly for the time. Science fiction television to that point, with the exception of maybe some of the Doctor Who stuff, but most science fiction was sort of driven, you know, episodically. There was a problem that we're going to face, and it was all very serious and very staid and straightforward. And people would stand on the bridge and issue orders. There was almost a military aspect to most science fiction, as I say, with exceptions. But Farscape had a healthy dose of drama and a healthy dose of comedy, and a large slice of romance, which was unusual at the time. It was, I don't want to say it was groundbreaking or seminal, but it was unusual. And it had the advantage that we were working with the Henson Creature Shop, so they were producing incredible prosthetics, they were producing animatronics and all sorts of weird things that would show up. Which was unusual or unique for television.
And you talk about the romance, which of course was magical because you and Claudia Black just had something quite special. How do you manufacture chemistry, or can't you?
I don't think you manufacture chemistry. I auditioned with Claudia. I'd been cast in the role, and they flew me down to Australia to read with some very talented actresses. But it was very easy and instant with Claudia. We literally went out to work the lines. We read the lines once. I said, that's good, that's great. We went back and shot it for the producers in LA. And I got back to LA and I said, there's one girl. And that's something that's kismet. You know, that's one of those occurrences that happens. You go, oh, well, that was meant to be.
And then you were together again on Stargate 1, but you weren't together but not together. Did you have to put a stop to the chemistry? What did you do?
Well, interestingly enough, on Stargate SG-1, they kind of made a point of not putting us in scenes together. And we were definitely playing different characters, but the camera sometimes does something, whether it be Kirk and Spock, you know, or Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. You know, sometimes faces on camera kind of have this thing where they work with each other. You know, actors have a certain feel on camera, and you know, if you put Claudia and I in a room together, there's a number of times people said, I thought you guys were married. You know, no, not married. We're just good friends. but on camera, it was one of those things that on SG-1 they actually made a point of not putting us in shots together.
Are you still good friends? Do you keep in touch?
Yeah. I see her, you know, enough.
The other weird thing about Farscape, I guess, is that it's the first show really to span that internet fandom that really kept the show going, that revived it after it looked like it was headed for doom. And then you see that, you saw that in Firefly, which didn't quite work, and other shows where the fans then started to get the ball rolling, like Chuck, I think was one of them. How did it feel being that kind of groundbreaker, to be the first to utilise the internet, unbeknownly, I suppose, to get your show going?
Well, it's interesting because at that time, as you came through the mid and late 90s, internet fandom was in its infancy. right? And for Farscape, it came about at the right time when internet access was becoming ubiquitous, and particularly for science fiction fans who are quite often, they're prime movers in the technology world anyway. So at that time, when we were launching the show, we were using chat rooms and things like that to get the word out to what would essentially be our fandom, our base. So when the show was canceled, which was really an issue of bad timing more than anything else, Sci-Fi still wanted the show, but it had, television shows and science fiction shows are very expensive to produce. So we reached a money crunch, and that's why the show got canceled. Well, it got canceled at a very bad time, and we had been told there was going to be a 4th and 5th season, so the break occurred in the middle of basically what was a two-season or 2-series storyline. Made a lot of people very unhappy.
And it was actually called bad timing.
Yeah, it was bad timing, and those unhappy people did stuff about it, and they were very creative about it. They shut down Sci-Fi's switchboards. You couldn't get a call into Sci-Fi. They were so irate. They did things like they sent flowers to all the executives at Sci-Fi, basically saying, "I'm sorry about the death in the family." There was a thing called Browder off of Farscape, where they sent signed bras to the Sci-Fi network executives, so that boxes of signed bras appeared saying, "We want more Farscape." They were very creative, they were proactive, and I'm very grateful that we got a chance to do the miniseries because of it.
Has it given you a new appreciation of who your audience is?
Well, at this point, being that was 2003, 2002, that would be an old appreciation.
At the time.
Yeah, it's that thing where you go, "Oh, Farscape, that's a legendary series." You go, "Oh my gosh, I've already passed into legend." Passed into legend and into myth. It didn't really exist at all in the end,
Well, for a lot of people, you won't have existed until Doctor Who,
Oh,
which
yeah.
has got to be the biggest. How was that?
That was awesome. Oddly enough, most Americans, up until very recently, were unaware of Doctor Who. Sure, Sci-Fi fans were aware of it, but it wasn't like it was for the Commonwealth countries, where everybody grew up on it. If you were in the UK, you grew up on Doctor Who. If you in Australia, probably New Zealand, you grew up with Doctor Who. Well, I'm married to an English girl, and my kids were essentially raised on the recent incarnation of Doctor Who. So when I got an offer to go do it, there was no question. It didn't matter what else was going on. Spielberg could have been calling, and I was like, "No, I got to do Doctor Who." That is sort of being part of myth and legend.
Can I ask you about your accent? Because it's such a Southern boy accent, and yet science fiction's such a neutral thing where everyone seems to have a Californian accent. How do you manage to sort of keep getting the gigs and not changing yourself?
I don't understand.
Well, you have that drawl, that really American drawl, that every time you hear your voice, it's really distinctive. You manage to use it to great effect in the Doctor Who episode. But science fiction people, do they not try and sort of modify accents so that they all sound quite neutral and spacey?
I don't know why they would do that. Have you ever listened to the astronauts? Listen to astronauts. Listen to pilots. Go around the world. You go around the world, and you'll be flying into Singapore, and you have an Asian pilot, and he comes on and he says, "We're just making an approach into Singapore right now. Y'all sit back and enjoy the flight." For some reason, with pilots and with those folks, which I played a couple of pilots in science fiction, the Southern accent is pervasive. And also understand that from a standpoint of NASA, they were based out of Houston and out of Alabama and out of Florida. The space program is built by a bunch of Southerners.
So you're wedged into the sci-fi scene.
I wedged in legitimately.